I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea. Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
So glad you're here. Do you want to just start by introducing yourself and your family?
All right, so my name is Sarah, as you said, and I have 4 children, a 14-year-old daughter named Aspen, and then an 11-year-old son, Ethan, a 6-year-old son named Eli, and an 8-month-old son named Ian.
Wow, so you're going to have to dig into your memory treasure trove. And we are real life friends, but I met you when Ethan was maybe 3 or 2?
No, so it was Eli.
Eli, yeah.
Eli was like a year old, I think. And it's kind of funny because the first time I met you, we were at the Red Apple Farm on the Moms Club trip. And maybe he was a little bit older. Maybe he was like a year and a half or so. And when we were on the hayride, Eli wanted to nurse. And I did not know you. And I was kind of like, I wonder how this person is going to feel about me nursing a toddler.
Wow.
So kind of, and then, then once I got to know you, I was like, oh, they would have been totally fine with that.
Right. Little did you know, right? Yeah. Well, I'm so happy to hear your stories. We've talked about baby feeding over the years.
And you've helped me with it. I don't know if you remember with Eli, you helped with that latch there when he was not latching properly and hurting my nipple.
Yeah, I do remember that. Okay, so before we get into your first experiences, what was your exposure to breastfeeding, human milk feeding before you were actually having your own children?
It was just kind of the norm. My mom breastfed me and my brother. I know my mother-in-law breastfed my husband. In my mom's side of the family, my cousins and stuff, they breastfed. So it was just a normal thing. I always had expected that I would breastfeed my children because it's just what you do. And I remember my mom used to talk about her mom, who also breastfed. And that would have been back in like the 40s. She had 4 children and a set of twins at that. And she breastfed all of them because she thought it was better for them.
Oh, wow.
And at that time, it was kind of formula was new and exciting. And people were kind of encouraging you to do formula. And my grandmother, especially with twins, was very adamant that she was not going to use formula, that it should be breast milk. So it was kind of just a given, that I would because of my family's view on nursing.
Yeah. Wow. So you just assumed it would happen for you. So As you then were thinking about starting your own family, did you have any goals in mind for
I knew
baby
I
feeding?
wanted to breastfeed for at least a year. My goal was to make it to that year. I really wasn't sure if it would be for me because my nipples are very sensitive and I don't like anything touching them.
Hmm.
So I said I'll make it to a year. That's what I'm going to do, and then I will be done.
Yeah. So it's interesting because your family's culture shaped your ideas of, yes, I'll do this, but your own personal preferences about your body.
Exactly, was saying, I don't know, because I just,
Wow.
any sort of, even just a shirt is too much. So I was thinking a person
Hmm.
nursing would be a lot to deal with.
Wow. So you were hoping to just grin and bear it for a year.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um,
And then it was nothing like I expected. It
hmm,
did not bother me.
wow. So you have four experiences of baby feeding. So you can decide how much you want to focus on each of those experiences, but we know that birth experiences impact feeding and how that goes. So we're not going to spend too much time on the births, but as you think about how the births went and how that might have impacted those early feeding experiences, you can kind of give us a quick synopsis of the birth experience and then what led to those early feeding experiences as well.
For me, I don't really think my birth experiences had that much of an impact. I don't know, maybe because the type of experiences I had, all mine were vaginal deliveries. Um, Three of my babies nursed within a few hours of birth. My first had a few issues after she was born, so I didn't get to, hold her immediately
Mm,
or nurse her for a little while.
mhm,
But nursing wasn't a problem once we were together. And
mm,
actually, same with my second. He also, um, I didn't get to have him immediately after birth. He had some issues as well. But
mhm,
again, he latched no problem once we were together. And my third, his birth was challenging as well. And he did not get to nurse for some time, actually, because he was in the NICU because he had a shoulder dystocia and had to be on oxygen and a feeding tube. So he did not nurse until the next day.
wow,
Um, but then once he was able to nurse again, we were fine. And for my
wow,
fourth, I finally got that delivery where you get the baby right after they're born, put on your chest, and you know, nurse them, and that was great. And he did a fine job starting to nurse as well. So I don't think for any of them really, their birth hindered in the end their ability to nurse. It would have been nice to nurse them all immediately after they were born. That was my hope for every one of them, to hold them immediately and nurse them, but it didn't happen, and I still think it worked out fine.
yeah, it worked out fine in the end, but for many people it doesn't. So it's great that it didn't. For many people in that same experience, it doesn't. Um, so what can you tell us a little bit about how long it was that those separations happened?
It was a few hours
Okay.
for the first two. I
Uh-huh.
want to say it was right around 2 hours
Okay.
for the first two, and then for the other, for my third, it was hours. I didn't get to see him. He was born and immediately rushed out of the room. So I mean, I didn't even physically touch him, lay eyes on him for
Wow.
I think it was 4 hours after he was born.
Wow.
And then when I first saw him, I wasn't able to nurse him because he was, in a NICU little incubator with tubes all over him. The feeding tube going into his belly and oxygen, and then all other sorts of tubes over him, monitoring stuff. And so that was really hard.
Yeah.
And they initially actually didn't think he would be able to nurse for a few days because just his breathing, they didn't think he would have enough oxygen to be able to do the work of nursing, but he improved rapidly, much quicker than they expected, and I was able to nurse him, the next, it was in the night, because he was born around 4
Uh-huh.
at night, and, it was like, I don't know, 4 in the morning or something the next day. They came down and said, come on up, you can nurse him.
Mm.
And he did fine.
Wow. Wow. And then what were that sounds so so hard. I knew that I knew about the shoulder dystocia. I knew that it had been a really difficult birth, but I don't think I knew the extent.
Yeah,
Um,
it was pretty crazy. It
yeah,
was it was an intense time.
I
And
bet.
then after that, he gradually came off all the tubes, and like when he nursed before the first time, he was off the oxygen, but they did put him back on just to help, you know, help him. But he was off the oxygen pretty quickly within the first day and a half or so. But they kept him in the NICU for 4 days, just to make sure everything was good and hooked up to all the monitors and stuff, because he was still having some issues every now and then breathing.
Okay. And when he was in the NICU, were you able to be there
I
with him,
was.
holding him?
It worked out fantastic. They actually, so he was delivered at UMass,
Mm-hmm.
and they were great. I was on the floor below, and I was able to come up and be with him as much as possible. And because, like I said, they weren't expecting him to improve as quickly as he did, and they extended my stay a little bit so that I could be there when he was there. But they were had offered, there was kind of like, it used to be a closet, I think, but it was relatively large. And they had even said once I left that I could come and stay there so that I could be near him, which I thought was amazing. I didn't need to take advantage of that because he was able to come home when I went home.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, they were great, and I could spend as much time as I wanted. They even, the kids were able to come and meet him. Obviously, this was before COVID. They were able to come and meet him in the NICU,
Mm.
um, which was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell me the spacing, the age spacing of your kids again. How-
So the first are 3 years apart.
Okay.
Then it's 4.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was born, I had a 7 and a 4-year-old,
Okay. Okay.
and then the baby is, well, depending on which child you're looking at, but he is 6 years apart from my youngest,
Right. Okay.
then 10 and 13 years
Right.
from the other two.
Wow. Yeah. Um, and so with the first two, what were the complications that caused those separations?
Um, so both of them had issues with like breathing and stuff after they were born, but none of my deliveries were smooth, easy deliveries.
Mm-hmm.
For my daughter, there had been issues with her heart rate, and then once she was born, just with her breathing and that sort of thing. So she had to be checked out, and then um, I was having issues with my placenta not coming out,
Mm.
and there was doctors working on me, and eventually I ended up getting her, after those first couple of hours, and nursing her whilst the doctors were still trying to get my placenta out because it
Mm.
didn't come out for over 2 hours after delivery.
Mm.
And
And
then
you couldn't
for
take.
my second, same thing. He had issues breathing after he was born. His labor was also challenging for him and myself, and he had to have an IV to help him. They gave him some medication and stuff to help get his lungs going. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when they were doing all of that stuff, trying to get him to breathe, obviously he couldn't be with me.
Yeah. Wow. So he was in the baby care nursery at those.
No, he was in the room with me. They
In
did
the room
everything
though.
having to do with him. They were able to do in the delivery suite.
Okay. And the same with your daughter.
Same with my daughter. Yep. The
Okay.
only one who left the room was my third.
Okay.
And like I said, that was like immediately.
Right. Okay.
Like
Okay.
when he was born, he literally was gray. His APGAR score was a 1.
Wow. Yeah. And what was the gestational age of each of your babies?
So my first was born at 37 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
then my second at 38,
Mm-hmm.
and then my third was 41,
Hmm.
almost 42. I had to be induced for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then my third, he was born 5 days early, and I was induced for him because they did not want him to be as large as his brother and get stuck and have a shoulder dystocia.
Right. This was the fourth.
Be the
His
fourth.
baby.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so uh, was there any indication that there would be so many complications?
No,
Okay.
we didn't even know he was so large. I hadn't measured large at the
Mm-hmm.
ultrasounds I had. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't measuring large at any of my appointments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was a complete shock that
Mm-hmm.
he was that big. No one expected it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything with his delivery up until that split second at the very end when he got stuck was going fine. So it's kind of ironic because with the first two, there'd be heart rate drops and all sorts of stuff going on where it was like, oh, with my daughter, the first, they were talking, we might have to do a C-section if her heart rate keeps dropping how it is because,
Mm-hmm.
something's going on with the cord and that sort of thing. And with my second, similarly, he had heart rate issues. His cord was wrapped around his neck multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
With my third, everything was totally fine the
Mm-hmm.
entire labor
Mm-hmm.
until he got stuck at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, this is the kid I'm getting right away. He's going
Right.
to come right on my chest
Right.
immediately after he's born.
Uh-huh.
And it changed very quickly.
Wow. Okay.
And with my
Oh,
fourth, there was everything was totally fine, just like with the third. Heart
right.
rate great, everything was great the whole time.
Okay. And then finally you got that
Exactly.
experience that everybody dreams of the baby right to the chest, the skin immediate
Correct.
to the skin. Right. Um, okay. Well, I'm glad you finally, after all those years.
I know. And I mean, for my fourth, they had wanted me to have a C-section because of everything that happened with my third. But
Yeah.
I was very adamant about not having a C-section.
Hmm.
And it all worked out fine.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Um, so tell me a little bit if you can remember what those first latches were like once you finally were able to.
They were great.
Hmm.
It's just that, I don't know, there's some hormones or something that happens that makes it fantastic. And
Hmm.
everything I'd kind of feared that would happen with my first, that kind of repulsion at something touching my nipple, it didn't. And it was good. I was nervous with the first, like, is she latched right? Is this the right way to do it? Just not as sure because I'd never done it before.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it was good. It
Yeah.
all it worked out well.
And so that should be comforting for other people who have that sort of um, that 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 repulsion to having their nipples touched or
Yeah,
rubbed or yeah.
I was totally surprised
Hmm.
that it did not bother me,
Hmm.
like at all,
Hmm. Yeah.
because I just didn't see how it couldn't.
Hmm. Right. And so, did you receive any support in the hospital from
Yep.
anyone as you were questioning, is this right? Am I
Yes.
right? Okay.
Where I delivered, they were very breastfeeding friendly. The nurses were very knowledgeable. So that's who initially helped me because they're in the room,
Hmm.
not like a lactation consultant or someone. They helped, show me how to hold her, make sure she was in the right position, what a good latch would look like, that sort of thing. Um, and then I think the next day they had like a little class you could go to. It was just in one of the rooms in the maternity area. You know, I walked down in my Johnny, and there was a lactation consultant there who talked about breastfeeding and what to expect, and what how much a baby would be eating at that age, and as they got older, and signs to look for to make sure they were eating as they should be.
Mm.
Um, and then they also had a lactation consultant you could have come to your room and just consult with you, which I did because it was my first and I wanted to make sure we were good to go. So there was a lot of support there. And it's interesting. So for my first, they still did though give out like formula samples and
Oh,
bags
wow.
from the formula companies.
Uh-huh.
And for my 3 subsequent births at the same hospital, they made even more of a shift to be more supportive of breastfeeding and trying to encourage that. And they made an active choice to not give out those samples and coupons and bags. I
Mhm.
mean, there was a lot of stuff I left with my first from the formula companies, that they had donated to the hospitals to get people to buy their formula. But
Right.
they stopped doing that. So it's interesting to see because I have quite the spread, from
Right.
14 years or even just from 3 years from when I had my first to my second,
Hmm.
how the view of breastfeeding changed at the hospital. And I think overall, from my first, as I've gone through each child, I feel like it's not just me being more comfortable with it and feeling okay nursing in public. I feel like there's a bit of a shift in the public about accepting breastfeeding and being less, people being less concerned or judgmental about women breastfeeding openly
Hmm.
versus, back in 2007. I
Yeah.
think there's definitely a change.
Yeah. I can imagine. Yeah, I have my very first interview I did is actually a close relative of mine, and her first child was born in 2009. And she said, "Lo, it was not like it is today. We did not have free the nip like we do today." Which I think those movements have been happening for a while, but in her experience, living especially in the South in Florida, you know, she's in my own family, and she felt like breastfeeding, even in my family, she could do it as long as she was covered, even at a family
Yeah.
event.
Well, for my first, I had a Hooter hider, like a little cover that I used, and for my fourth, no, not at all.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So I mean, just a shift in myself
Hmm.
and my comfort breastfeeding, but also, like I said, I think a shift in society.
Yeah.
We're more accepting.
Yeah. Yeah. So you felt that's neat that there was actually a class at the hospital for people who had given birth. I don't think
Yeah,
I have heard of that.
and it's the only one. I don't remember that happening for my other deliveries.
Mhm.
I don't remember there being a class, because they post things and tell you what's going on, and I don't remember anyone telling me. I probably wouldn't have gone anyways because I felt very comfortable nursing at that point.
Mhm.
But I don't know if they were still doing it or not. But yeah, there was me and like a couple other moms that had delivered. We were obviously still at the hospital, so recently delivered. That
Mhm.
they talked to and went over different things, which was very interesting for me to learn with my
Yeah,
first.
of course. Yeah, so then how long, I know that NICU stay was a little bit longer with the third. How long were you in the hospital with each of your kids?
So we actually went home with my first, like the next day,
Hmm.
and same with my second. We left like shortly after, because I really just would rather be home than at the hospital because they wake you up so much and that sort of thing. So we left the next day.
So once you did get home with your kids, did you feel supported?
Um, yes. So for my daughter, like I said, we left early. So the hospital had a visiting nurse come out, and which I thought was great and convenient. But the visiting nurse wanted me to start feeding with formula
Huh.
because My daughter was slightly jaundiced, not enough where we had to, go in and have light treatments, but we needed to put her in the sun, that sort of thing. And she had dropped some from her birth weight. And the visiting nurse was telling me that I should start doing every other feeding with formula, which I did not
Wow.
want to do and did not do. Um, and I had an appointment very shortly after, the next day or the day after, with our primary care, who was very supportive of breastfeeding. And she said, absolutely not. The amount of weight your daughter has dropped is totally to be expected. Not a big deal. You do not need to start feeding every other feeding with formula. Um, so I think it could have been a crucial point if
Yes.
I didn't have my goal set and wasn't raised in the family I was raised and didn't have the primary care that I had who was so supportive. Because this nurse was pretty adamant that I needed to do this, and I didn't think I did. But she could have easily swayed someone who wasn't as sure of what they wanted to do or of themselves breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So,
Now, was she also a lactation consultant?
no, she was just a nurse. And it somehow worked. I don't know if she was like how it was arranged through the hospital, but
Mm-hmm.
someone who comes out and does a weight check and
Mm-hmm.
sees how the baby's doing, all the sort of stuff they would have done if we were still in the hospital.
Right. Wow. Yeah, you're totally right that if you had not been in the family you were in, had not been sure of yourself and your goals, and had not had a supportive doctor who was caring for you and baby. Um,
And my primary care was very supportive. Actually, with my daughter, because breastfeeding went so well and I enjoyed it so much, and so did she. Um, once she got to a year old, we just kept going,
mhm,
which everyone in my family was supportive of breastfeeding, but not that long.
mhm.
So once my daughter was a year, I was getting from friends and family members that, all right, it's time to stop. You're still
Mhm,
nursing your child. She's too
mhm.
big for that. And I remember going to my 1 year appointment and being slightly embarrassed to tell my primary that we were still nursing and I wasn't really thinking about stopping yet. And my doctor was like, good for you. You
Oh,
keep
wow.
going. It is fantastic for her. It's good for you. It's great for your relationship. Um, and that actually made me feel great and really made me even more definite in my decision that I was going to keep nursing for, I don't know. And also my husband. My husband was very supportive of continuing to nurse because he saw how much we both benefited from it and what a great tool it was.
Mhm.
If your child is sick or really upset or just needs some extra time, that nursing right there, it's kind of a priceless parenting tool that he didn't have, but he saw how great it could be.
Right. I don't have to do anything to calm this child down. Sure. Keep doing it. Right.
So I think between him and my primary, they're the two that really, um, why I breastfed my daughter until she was 2.5, which
Mhm.
she was actually the shortest. Well, my youngest is only 8 months right now, but I plan to breastfeed him for quite some time still. And the only reason I stopped nursing her at 2.5 is because we wanted to have another child,
Mhm.
and breastfeeding really affects my cycle. So I stopped then to have our second.
Mhm.
And then I nursed my second until he was 3,
Mhm.
and my third until he was 3.5.
Yeah. Wow. So I want to ask you something, because most people have a pediatrician, which is somebody who specializes in a doctor that, um, a doctor who specializes in children. But you and your children see the same family doctor and
And
have,
my husband,
and your
all of
husband.
us.
Everybody goes and sees the same family doctor. And
Yep,
I'm bringing that up because in these early days, when you were going to the family doctor, this family doctor also delivered your babies, right?
correct.
Okay. So the same person delivered your babies and then also did your postpartum care for both you and your babies.
Yep. So one appointment, I mean, well, there are two appointments, but same time, everything. Literally, when I'm having my 6 week check, I'm up on the table, legs spread, nursing a baby.
Mm-hmm,
And, my doctor is good with it. I think having a doctor that does all of that is fantastic because they know you, they know your children, they know your family. I think it's a great way to provide healthcare.
mm-hmm,
I think it should be provided like that more often. I mean, I don't have a specialist. I don't go see a gynecologist. I just go to my primary care. They do all of it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and what difference do you think that made for you in those early postpartum days when you did have questions about your care or your baby's care?
I just think I valued what they said more because I knew they knew me, and um, it just made me feel more comfortable. And I really think for my delivery, for my first three, the same doctor delivered all three, and by my fourth, she was no longer delivering. So it was a different doctor, but she's the same doctor I saw throughout my whole pregnancy.
Mm-hmm,
So, we had months of time to get to know each other. And she is our primary care now because my prior doctor, who cared for our family for 13 years, left the practice. So we have a new doctor.
mm-hmm,
And I think having someone who knows you just really helps. I mean, so with my fourth, like I said, they wanted a C section. My whole pregnancy, it was, is it going to be a C section? I did have to see a high risk doctor just for a consult, and they said absolutely you're a guaranteed C section.
Oh,
And
wow.
even with this primary who I just started working with, and he said, "Well, I don't know. We'll have to see about that." And she was just great, and even up until 4 hours before my son was born, I was in labor for him for multiple days. And, they were talking about maybe having to do a C section.
Mm-hmm,
And my primary was like, we'll give you, which doesn't seem like much, but she's like, we'll give you another hour before we start prepping you for a C section. And in that hour, everything changed. And he was delivered a couple hours later vaginally.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
so just having, versus if this was just some random doctor who didn't know me, I don't know if they'd be willing to give me that time and
right,
to listen to what I'm saying about what I think my body can do.
right.
So
Yeah.
I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah. So, can you tell me a little bit about, in those early days as you brought each baby home and you're nursing them, were you ever in any pain?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. And what was that like?
So, the I think the first one that was probably the worst. It was kind of like sometimes like a painful burning. I think some of it was just my nipples getting used to nursing. Um, and then at one point, maybe when she was around 5 weeks old, I developed a crack in one of my nipples, which ended up with mastitis, which was horrible.
Mm,
And that crack just would not heal. And I went to my primary care's office, but my primary care wasn't in that day. And I saw someone else, and she prescribed me all purpose nipple ointment,
mm,
which is a combination of steroid, antibiotic, and an antifungal. And I swear every nursing mother should have that on hand in case they ever need it because things happen sometimes where nursing hurts and that stuff, if you do get a little abrasion or something, it helps heal it so quickly. So I mean, nursing is not like always roses and sunshine. At least it hasn't been for me. There's plenty of times where there's no pain, which is great, but everything changes depending on what's going on with the child. So right now, my 8-month old just had his top teeth come in. And, after that initial settling into nurse when he was first born, we've had no issues. I've had no pain, but his latch is shifting a bit as his teeth come in. I think he's just figuring out how to nurse with
Mhm.
top teeth. And,
Mhm.
my nipples are a little sore. And he actually has bitten me on several occasions recently, which my other children did not.
Mm.
I want to say he's probably bitten me like 8 times now, and
Wow.
like hard bites. And
Yeah.
I think he's just figuring out those teeth and
Yeah.
curious about the feels in his mouth. But yeah, so
None of your other children ever did chomp down?
no, they did bite me eventually, but not at this age. So my daughter, I remember the very first time she bit me, she was probably like 18 months, and she had eaten lunch, and then I was nursing her for her nap, and I didn't realize she had a little piece of tomato skin like stuck in her mouth. And I
Mm.
think having that tomato skin on the roof of her mouth, was discerning, and she bit me, and
Mm.
yeah, it hurt. That was the first time I vividly remember and like wow. But
Yeah.
I definitely my fourth right now. This is the most I've ever been bitten this early.
And how do you handle it when he bites you? What do you do?
I just pop him off. Well, he usually actually bites and then pops off. I don't really do much of anything. I don't want to have a big reaction. The first time he did it, I was so surprised. I said, "Ow,"
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of thought it was funny.
Mm.
So I try not to have much of anything right now, and I'm hoping just as he figures out those teeth, we're going to move past that. I do keep my hand close by so I can quickly pop him off if needed, if he does bite and not pop off himself. But that's what I've been doing so far.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just feel like you have to be a little bit more alert, more kind of
Yeah, I'm
tuned
not quite
in.
as relaxed.
Yeah. Can you have you identified any tells, any signs that he's about to
No, no, I've been calling him a
Gotta
little nipple
get-
nipper because yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I hope he outgrows this quickly because it is not enjoyable.
No, I'm sure it's not. Yeah. Yeah. So when the time did you have mastitis any other time besides that once with your daughter?
Yes, I've
Okay.
had it a few times.
Mm.
Um, with my third, I had it a few times, and that was around the time I met you
Hmm.
when I was having that issue. Because again, I feel like they get teeth, or little things change, and it kind of shifts their latch, and
Hmm.
you need to refigure it out all over again.
Hmm.
And for him, I think he had had some of his teeth come in, and one particular breast, just because of a different shape, he just wasn't latching right, and little cuts or whatever on my nipple, and I had mastitis in that breast. I want to say 3 times, but I almost feel like it just never cleared up from the first time. It was just kind of lingering there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so
Yeah.
I've had it on multiple occasions.
And then I'm curious because when we met and you said, I've been having this pain, I was like, man, I don't know. You've nursed two other kids. I am at the time I was a CLC. I'm still a CLC. I'll be sitting for board exams this year. To be an IBCLC, but I was new as a CLC, and I was like, I'll look at you. I'm not sure if I can give you any more support than what you already know as somebody who's fed several babies from your body, but I'll take a look. Did you, after that time we spoke, did you ever get, well, we didn't just speak. I did an in-person eval, really. But did
Yeah,
you ever get mastitis again after that?
I don't think so.
Mm. Hmm.
I don't believe so. And what's interesting, what you're saying, we were kind of thinking, what do I have to offer? Because before you, which, I'd met you, Mom's Club, and, hanging out every week, I had actually called a lactation consultant
Mhm.
because I was like, okay, this is not right. This, going through temporary periods where things hurt because things are changing, for me, that's been normal, but it doesn't last a long time.
Mm.
I feel confident, hopefully, in a few weeks, once Ian is used to his two top teeth, which literally came in at the same time, which that's a big change in your mouth.
Yeah.
Once he's used to that, we'll figure it out. And this period we're going through will hopefully stop. And that's been my experience in past, except for with my third, with my left breast, when he got some teeth, it didn't. So I had reached out to a lactation consultant and, went over my nursing experience. And she was like, I really don't know what I have to offer you. She actually didn't come out
Wow.
because she was like, I can email you some information, which I was like, I don't really need that. But
I need
yeah.
somebody to look at my baby. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
you were not the only one to be hesitant. She was as well.
Hmm. So I was thinking about those times that you had mastitis with your other kids. Did anyone ever? It was great that you got the cream. Were you ever on antibiotics for the mastitis as well?
Yes.
Okay. So when you went to see care providers or called your care provider and said, I had mastitis, did anyone ever say there's a reason milk is building up and usually it's as a result of milk not transferring? Um, you really should probably see a lactation professional to look at that.
No, no one ever did.
Okay.
Um, they gave me pointers on how to like nurse in different positions, soaking my breast. Um, Again, it's almost kind of like, I mean, obviously my primary carers are not lactation consultants, but they did look at me nursing and kind of just, have an idea, say maybe that looks good or,
Mm-hmm.
never any like specific pointers like you gave me when you assessed nursing with my third. But they did provide some guidance and kind of look into that area. It wasn't like it was just like, there's no reason this is happening. Here's your antibiotics, be on your way.
Mm-hmm.
But no specific, like, you should make sure their lips are like this or, stuff like that. That didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and did they ever evaluate any of the baby's mouths? Look inside the mouths, look under the lips, check the
No,
suck, any of that?
nope.
Okay. And I happen to know that your third has speech, um, has some speech, needs speech services now, which can
Yes.
sometimes be tied to things related to breastfeeding, milk transfer, like those things are often interrelated. So it's kind of interesting that you had, you know, mastitis, some painful latches, uh, but no one ever said, hey, maybe we should look into this.
Yeah, that is. I think maybe because on my doctor's end, um, a lot of the thought was that his speech issues were associated with hearing. So maybe people weren't thinking about his mouth because he did have at 9 months, because he was a NICU baby,
Mm-hmm.
a hearing test was standard, and his first hearing test came back with some deficits.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, I can't really speak to what they were thinking, but maybe that was kind of their thought that it was more hearing related for his speech issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 No, I just, we never know. We never know when you're looking in hindsight what could have happened or what, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to think about when you hear, oh, a person has had a mastitis repeatedly. Um, could that have been avoided um, had somebody looked in the baby's mouths?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm sure if we had had a better latch, it could have been avoided
yeah.
because, I mean, I feel confident that's what was the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
was always the left breast,
Mm.
always the problem one,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's a little different shaped than the right. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, that didn't click with his mouth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Was it was it usually later on when your babies were a little older, or was it a variety of ages?
Variety of ages. With my daughter, she was an infant,
Uh-huh.
in the first couple of months. Probably within the first 3 months, I think, is when I had it with her.
Okay.
And that time was the worst time
Mm.
out of any of them.
Yeah.
It was extremely painful.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when I had that crack that just
Yeah.
wasn't going away.
Which is also
And
an indication of something that could be adjusted with the latch,
yes,
you
yep.
know, or milk transfer, something going on with the milk transfer, which which needs a full evaluation by somebody who really is adept at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That would have been helpful.
yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's
It would have been
and the
fantastic.
reason I'm pointing it out is not to place blame on anybody, but just to show the systemic gaps that exist.
It would have been fantastic if they had something like that at the office.
Right. Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
someone on staff instead of having to go,
Right.
that would have
Exactly.
been great. Just like at the hospital.
Right. Yeah, because the place where you go, it's a very large practice with lots of practitioners for a variety of things.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah. So did you ever? Oh, I wanted to ask when you mentioned that your third in the NICU was being fed through a tube. Um, what was he being fed through the tube?
Breast milk.
Breast milk. So you were pumping at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know. I would assume from the get go it was breast milk. I don't know. I was pumping and giving them milk.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume that's what they used the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't know if his very first feed, it was breast milk because they didn't feed him at first. He might have had like some sugar water, I feel like, because of his blood sugar levels, I feel. There
Mm-hmm.
was something going on there too. But yes, I was pumping and they were taking it up to the NICU.
Okay. And this was this a multi-user pump provided by the hospital
It
or?
was. It was one of those like industrial hospital pumps.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it stayed in my room. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't like leave.
Travel, right?
That's actually the same for my second. When he was 4 weeks old, I was having some health issues and I had to have a lung biopsy.
Mm.
And it was supposed to be only a couple days that I was in the hospital, but I was in the hospital for a week. And I had an industrial pump that the hospital provided that just stayed right in my room. And
Mm.
I was not in any sort of prenatal area
Right.
for my stay, but they were great about it. They would come and take my milk, and they had a special fridge they put it in so my husband could come and get it.
Wow.
Um, my son did have formula for the very first little bit that I was in the hospital because he was born. And then when he was 2 weeks old, we went to Florida and then we came home and I had my lung biopsy the next day. So I just didn't have time to
Yeah.
build up a supply for him to have milk at home when I went into the hospital.
Yeah.
Um, so he had formula and we had tried to give him formula before I went in when we were in Florida to get him ready and he adamantly refused it. He would not drink it.
Oh.
Um, but I said to my husband, well, he's gonna have to when I'm not there. And he did. He was fine with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was fine with the bottle. And then after I was there for a little bit, like I said, my husband would come every day and get all the milk and he had just breast milk. But
Yeah. Yeah.
they were very helpful. It was kind of funny when they would come and do their rounds in the morning. That's usually when I wake up and I was pumping. And, there's a team of doctors that come in and they open the curtain and they're not used to someone sitting there with their boobs out
Right.
pumping.
Right.
And everyone, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, that's fine. Just come on in.
Yeah.
I don't care. Come on in. I got to get this
You
done
are a doctor.
here. Exactly.
Yeah.
If it was a delivery floor, they would have been used to it. But it was interesting. It happened like every morning. The
Oh,
the
wow.
shock on people's faces when they came into my little curtained off area.
Oh, that's funny. Um, so what was that like for you? Was it hard? Was it hard emotionally to decide? to feed the formula when you realized you needed to have the biopsy, or
It was.
okay.
It was. I didn't want to.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why. Just because my first never had any formula.
Mhm.
And not that formula is a bad thing. I mean, that works for plenty of people.
Mhm.
But that's just, it's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
Um, so I definitely, I had some feelings about it, but I didn't really have a choice because, like I said, we were in Florida. So
Mhm.
how was I going to build up a supply, then fly home with all this frozen milk? And,
Mhm.
it just logistically was going to be very challenging. I mean, we're already on vacation. We already left with a 2-week-old, so that's already challenging enough to begin with.
Right, exactly.
Never
Yeah.
mind coming home and having a lung biopsy the next day. And the whole lung biopsy, it was planned very shortly before we were supposed to go on our trip. So it
Mhm.
wasn't like I knew from day one when he was born that this
Right.
was happening. Like it was all
Kind of passed.
kind of a crazy time and things
Yeah.
just were happening. So,
Right.
yeah, but I definitely did not like the idea. And I didn't like the idea of him having, I was concerned with him having a bottle so much that it was going to make our breastfeeding harder.
Mhm.
Um, and it didn't. And actually, so when my husband would come in every day, he would bring my daughter, who was 3 at the time, and my son,
Mm.
who was 4 weeks, and I would nurse him once a
Oh,
day.
good. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I still did get to breastfeed him once a day. And I mean, I was not well. So
Mhm.
half the time I would literally fall asleep,
Mm.
in the middle of the day nursing him, and he would nurse, and then my husband would take him and they would go.
Mhm.
Um, but so it was nice as well because for me, pumping does not, I can pump and get enough to feed my children, but I
Mhm.
feel like it doesn't empty my breast the way nursing does.
Yeah.
So it was nice to still have that full empty each
Mm.
day when he came in.
Yeah.
As you can hear, my phone is ringing in the background.
Yeah. It's okay. It's fine. Um, just our we'll just have to hear a ringing phone. That's fine. Yeah. And so did you do anything to kind of like did you learn about paced bottle feeding to kind of protect your milk supply and protect, you know, that breastfeeding relationship? Did you, you know,
No.
did you do any of that, or did you just kind of wing it and hope for the best?
Yeah, I just tried to, I pumped religiously when I was in the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
like day and night.
Mm,
I would pump kind of around like when I would have been feeding him,
mm,
um, because I didn't want my milk supply to be affected. And that was really the only thing, is just
mm-hmm,
making sure I was pumping enough, one, to keep my milk up, and two, to have enough milk to feed him at home,
mm-hmm.
because I didn't really want him to have more formula than he needed to have.
Right. Yeah.
And, the one interesting thing, I always, with my first, I was hesitant to give a binky because people had said, that might affect breastfeeding. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't. And with my second, we tried because he just, he wanted to suck on stuff. And he loved a pacifier when I was in the hospital. And
Mm.
for a couple of weeks after I came home, he used a pacifier. And I almost think it's because he was so used to nursing on a bottle
Yeah.
and like that rubber feel. And then once I came home after, nursing him again for a week or so, he was like, nope, I
Yeah.
do not want this pacifier anymore. I want your skin.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you do any pumping with the others?
So with my first, I pumped regularly because I went back to work when she was around 8 weeks or so.
Okay.
So I pumped every day,
Mm-hmm.
when I was at work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I usually pumped like once on the weekend
Mm-hmm.
just to have, more milk at home built
Mm.
up for when I wasn't there.
Yeah.
For my second, I, obviously pumped in the hospital. And then I would pump periodically to have a supply at home in case I was going out or what have you. But I wasn't working, so it wasn't as critical
Yeah.
as it was with my first. And with my third, I didn't really pump. I
Mhm.
just used the, I think it was called a Milkies.
Mm.
It's kind of,
Oh, yeah, you told me about those.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would just put it on the other side whilst I was nursing, and the shape of it around my nipple would kind of encourage it to flow as well, and it would just collect it. And
Uh-huh.
I would do that for like two nurses, and I would have enough in a bag to have a bottle when I was out. So
Uh-huh.
that was fantastic because I really don't like pumping.
Yeah.
I find it um, uncomfortable. A lot of times it makes my nipples sore, just not a fan.
Yeah.
And then for my fourth, I have not pumped at all either. I have, oh, I can't remember what it's called. It's like, it's along the lines of the Milkies. I'm sure you know it. It starts with an H.
The hot
But
bath.
this, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I have that. That works fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little stockpile in the fridge from using that. But
Oh, great.
my fourth will not take a bottle. So
Mm.
he hasn't really used it. He just started using a sippy cup, and I actually went out yesterday, or no, Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
for like 7 hours. But yeah, he no
Yeah.
bottle for him.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because people get terrified that their kids, if their kids don't take a bottle, then they'll starve or they'll never be able to leave their babies. But there are other solutions. You can spoon feed, you can syringe feed, you can move on to a cup. You know, there are other things that you can do. Even little babies can use a cup if the caregiver is taught how to give the cup to a little baby. So it's not the end of the world if they won't take a bottle. There are other things you can do to make sure they get milk into their tummies.
And I didn't really think of that for little babies, like
Mhm.
little ones, because right now he's 8 months, so he's eating. He eats food twice a day right now, so
Yeah.
there's other options there, and he drinks out of a cup if you hold it.
Mhm.
But he started this not using a bottle, so when he was 3 months old, I went out for the first time, and he took a bottle, no problem.
Okay.
And the next time I went out, he absolutely refused.
Oh
He
no.
was also getting his bottom teeth. So we thought, well, maybe it's just those teeth coming in and he doesn't, you know. But ever since then, any bottle he is offered, he will not take. And I
Mm.
talked to my primary about it, and she said the same thing you said, to try, like using a little spoon or a little cup or a little syringe to get some breast milk in. So I've still been able to go out, but he just
Yeah.
hasn't had a bottle when I go out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely ways you can work around it. Now, if the people taking care of baby, are family members or friends, it's a little easier. If it's a daycare provider, it depends on how accommodating they are willing to be, on whether
Yeah.
or not they will try out other things. But if they're not willing to be accommodating, some people don't have the privilege of finding another place. But if you have the privilege of finding a more accommodating place, then you can,
Yes.
find somebody who would be willing to try other things. Um, awesome. Well, I have learned so much about your baby feeding experiences. We've talked a lot about baby feeding over the years, but I have so enjoyed, and I know there's so much more to talk about. I'm sure we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
Uh,
4 kids is a lot of feeding. So
I know it's a lot of feedings, a lot of hours. I'm sure if we tried to calculate the amount of money you were due based on the labor,
oh my gosh. Yes.
just based on feeding your children, you would be owed a big fat check.
I'd be a wealthy woman.
You would be wealthy. Yeah. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. Um,
Yes.
so I so appreciate you taking the time to share your stories. And as we wrap up, I would love to hear what was the worst advice that you were given about baby feeding?
So, hmm, I think for me, it wasn't just the advice from one person. It was just that the way people acted about me feeding nursing a toddler.
Mm,
I think that was the worst. I
mm,
remember, being out with my friends from college, and we were just talking about something, kids, and I said something about still nursing my daughter, who was just a little over a year at the time. I mean, talking a month, so she's probably
mm,
like 13 months old. And
mhm.
one of my friends turned and looked at me and said, "Oh, Sarah."
Wow.
Shocked and disgusted that I was still nursing my child, like it was some scandalous thing. And
Mhm,
she was not the only person.
mhm,
So I think that was probably the worst. And I know, say for my son, he was around like 2, and he just wanted to be with me a lot because I'm his mother. And
mhm,
my family members saying, "Well, if you stopped nursing him, he won't be so clingy." Um,
mm.
so I think those sort of things were kind of the worst advice or worst response I got from nursing.
Yes.
Not those early days. It's the discouraging the nursing of an older child.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I really feel like the climate is changing a little bit, but it was those of you who had the courage to follow your motherly intuition, and know that it was normal for so many humans across the globe, and it has been normal for humans across time that just decided to pave the way for us. So we
I
salute
actually, when my second was almost 2, we went to Costa Rica,
you.
and I was still nursing him.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, wow, this is great,
Hmm.
because everybody's attitude there about me breastfeeding a 20-month old
Hmm.
was like, absolutely, you still should be doing that. I remember driving down the street, and just like, there was a lady sitting out on her porch nursing her child who was clearly older than mine,
Hmm.
just, you know, out
Hmm.
there. And I thought that was just so wonderful and
Yeah.
such a difference from the United States
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally, any best advice that you received?
Just stick with it
Mm.
and trust that they're getting enough food.
Hmm.
So I never worried that I wasn't making enough milk. I know that's something that people worry about often. And I think a lot of it was that first class I went to with my daughter. The lactation consultant said, you know, your body will make enough. Your child is getting enough food. And she had these little wooden balls of like the different sizes of a baby's stomach as they
Hmm.
grew. And the first one was like the size of a marble. It was this little teeny ball. And she
Hmm.
was saying, just this is the size of their stomach.
Hmm.
You're making enough to fill this.
Hmm.
Don't worry that you're not.
Hmm.
So I think that was probably the best advice, because I really, after that, I felt like I was making enough. I thought,
Yeah.
I've got this. My body can do it. So
Yeah.
I think that was the best advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I thank you so much. And I'm sure so many people will be encouraged by your stories.
I hope so.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Milk Making Minutes. I hope you found connection and feel supported wherever you are in your baby feeding journey. The views expressed in each interview are deeply personal and sacred, and I'm so grateful to each person who was generous enough to share their story. It is also true that those views are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect my opinion or advice as a lactation supporter, and this podcast does not qualify as medical advice. If you are struggling to feed your baby, please seek out the support of a local IBCLC.